There's an increasing phenomenon around the United States. Some might call it an epidemic, really. Over 60 million Americans are currently in this particular industry, a number that's doubled in the last 5 years. Managers across the country are hemorrhaging millions of dollars annually into teams they assemble without any interview process, communication during their time working together, or any sort of payment structure. These managers tend to be hostile towards other managers in their divisions, lack consistency in their results year after year, and have even been known to drink on the job. So how is it possible to learn anything positive about leadership from this kind of backwards industry? Well, for as wicked as it can be, there are 3 critical components of leadership we can learn from fantasy sports. Number 1, understanding the people you work with and how to effectively communicate with them is essential to a productive workplace. The hostility fostered by fantasy sports' competitive nature creates communication barriers akin to those between competing professional groups internally and externally. The difference between alienating or motivating a counterpart at work or in fantasy sports can be very similar. The tone you present your dialogue with and the intentions behind your interaction can have a big impact on the success of your communications. Take a look at these 3 examples of fantasy sports speak and put them into a work setting. Here's number 1. This conversation starts off in a pretty matter-of-fact business manner, but gets personal pretty quickly. Nothing accomplished. This one features some pretty hostile remarks. It's very closed-minded, calling someone insane, saying not to worry about their business. Now this last one's a little bit more direct. Effective communication is essential to creating a positive work environment. Former RBC Financial Group VP Jim Rager utilized a say-do tactic to promote trust within the company. Say what you want to do, then how you'll enable people to do it. Combative conversation will never lead to success in the fantasy or business world. So say what you want, but establish the foundation for how that will get done. It doesn't have to be overly formal in either context, but make it personal and real, and make sure there's an emphasis on how it will get done. Number 2. With such a wealth of information currently available about today's sports, those that take the time to access the data, synthesize it in a way that makes sense to them, and apply it to their fantasy sports teams usually end up with the most success. Think of fantasy analysis like investing. It might sound absurd, but with the daily sports sites paying out nearly $3 billion last year, sometimes $1 million a week to a single person, it might be worth some time. Dr. Isaac Peterson studied expert projections of fantasy football from 2012 to 2015, and what he found was the variation in player performance was successfully predicted 63% of the time. Comparatively, look at some of these headlines highlighting the success rates of the top financial analysts assessing stock market valuations. Take the case of James Tran. He won a $1 million competition in daily fantasy sports partly because of a decision he made that only 0.1% of other fantasy owners made. He started a tight end with no history of consistently good performances or big game potential. So when asked why he decided to be so bold, he divulged 2 secrets. 90% of touchdowns the defense gave up was to tight ends, and the cost relative value was superior to other options. You see, it's those who take the time to find the information and integrate it into their work that usually find success, or at the very least, they build a solid foundation for the preparation of their next task. This is particularly true in leadership roles. Using evidence-based leadership can break down preconceived notions and present you with a more statistically factual reality. While there's a place for instinctual decision-making in business, people who refuse to adopt these modern methods are cheating themselves of a more complete decision-making spectrum at work or in fantasy sports. Finally, every working professional and fantasy sport player will eventually experience failure, sometimes in the most crushing fashions. If you invest the time to position yourself to succeed at work or with your fantasy team, but lose out on a big promotion or the championship game, that sinking feeling of failure can be backbreaking. However, those that are able to find the silver lining and learn from mistakes will ultimately triumph. Feedback is the catalyst for results. Although it might go against our innate need for self-preservation, assessing your mistakes internally or voluntarily asking for it, as opposed to hearing it in an unsolicited fashion, can be a constructive process that, when filtered appropriately to context and avoiding extremes, can be a real gift. It might be bizarre, but these 3 pillars of leadership are just as applicable in the office as they are on your fantasy teams. So next time your boss catches you fixing your fantasy lineup at work, make sure you tell them why. Thank you for your time.